When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadavji, your podcast host, a practicing clinical social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 5, The Inner Tale of Shifting from Self-Hate to Self-Love. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. It is with pleasure I introduce you to our guest, Karen Day. She is the president of the Daybreak Therapy and Training Center, which is an international network of professionals dedicated to mind, body, spirit connections in counseling, coaching, and the healing arts. She is the author of Breaking the Worry Trance. It's an e-course, and is also the lead developer of Creating Sacred Spaces, Canada's only annual conference dedicated solely to the advancement of best practices in holistic psychotherapy. Karen is a registered social worker and clinical counseling hypnotherapist, specializing in integrative psychotherapy with anxiety and trauma-related issues. Hello, Karen. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast. I really want to extend my gratitude for you coming on here onto the show during all of your busyness and showing your support for taking a stance to help break the barriers of mental stigma.
Oh, thank you for having me, my dear Salima. It is lovely to be here.
It is so lovely to have you. And so, Karen, this podcast is about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And we know that no matter the story, there is an impact on one's own mental health in some way, which remains tucked away. And this platform serves in a way to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So we are here really encouraging people to share and tell what individuals typically have reluctance for unveiling. Okay, Karen, are you ready?
I guess so. As ready as I'll ever be.
Well, I'm ready also. All right, so Karen, to start, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. How would it read?
How would it read? As I answer that question, I'm looking out my window on a bright and sunny day, and the headline, I guess, if it's a newspaper headline that we're thinking about, would have to be "The Light Wins."
And tell me what that means to you.
I really believe that no matter how dark it gets, that sunshine that's shining brightly as I speak to you right now, even though it's not always shining, it's always there somewhere, and it always does eventually come out. I know that's a really tacky metaphor, but I've been living my life for probably the past little while anyways, with that deep knowing that the light really does always win when we give it a chance.
I mean, it sounds like your headline really speaks to the journey and the process, something that's key for us to acknowledge and keep in the forefronts of our minds. And it really sort of also highlights this idea of having hope.
Exactly, exactly. And when we can't have hope, we can have a deep knowing of what
Right.
nature shows us, right? And what our life experience from a higher perspective teaches us, that the light does come, the daybreak does arrive.
Oh, is that where daybreak comes from?
That is where daybreak comes from, yes.
That's something new I learned today. So, on that note, Karen, tell us what your untold story is all about.
Yeah, well, when you asked me that and put that forward as a theme, I was thinking about different things and thinking, of course, that I don't really have an untold story, but I think my untold story is something really hidden that so many people have experienced but don't talk about,
Mhm.
which is a deep, dark, horrid depression. And I think that so many of us have had that experience of a dark night of the soul,
Mhm.
and so many of us are reluctant to discuss it. And I've had a few, like all people, dark nights of the soul, and also had that experience at an early age of
Mhm.
being diagnosed with clinical depression and entering the formal mental health system after a suicide attempt when I was in my darkest of my dark. And so I think it's a story a lot of people have, and there's a lot of shame around it. So I'm
Mhm.
breaking that silence.
Breaking that silence. Karen, can you say a little bit more about the dark night of the soul?
Well, the dark night of the soul is referenced in lots of works of literature and poetry, and I believe it's intrinsic to the human journey. And you and I have talked about writings of Joseph Campbell
Hmm.
and that hero's journey.
Right.
And we all like to tell this heroic part of the story of our lives.
Hmm.
And we sometimes gloss over the dark nights that are intrinsic to the human experience, to the evolution of who we really are. If we want to evolve, we really must become okay with talking about when we've lost all hope, when we were in our darkest night
Hmm.
and it felt like the sun would never come up, that there was no sign of hope. And so to honor that is to be able to talk about that is to honor it.
Right. And what this podcast is all about is really taking the time to share exactly that, right? Is to be able to talk about the darkest dark spot that you were in and to talk about what that was like and to be able to talk about it and the experience of it while still staying emotionally connected, right? So the idea is not to have anyone feel pressured into talking about something that they're not ready for, but to acknowledge that there is this journey that you went on. And though you might be on the other side or well on your way, that there is something that we're able to honor and take time to acknowledge that did occur.
Exactly. And, even just talking with you about this and even you doing this
Mm-hmm.
podcast is part of that honoring. And for me personally, and I'm sure for a lot of your guests, it's also a reclaiming
Mm-hmm.
of that time or that experience or that heartbreak. And there's no need to worry about this is going to make other people feel uncomfortable. So it's a way of showing self-compassion,
Yeah.
really, is to be able to speak openly.
Yeah, and not hide just because someone might feel discomfort. Like, I mean, this is your story, and we all have something. So, why are we hiding behind it or tucking it away for anyone to see? Like, I think this is the time where we delayer and we allow people to see all parts of ourselves.
Right. There really is an overemphasis in our
Hmm.
field and everywhere there is an overemphasis on helping people through positive and cheerful, and the
Mm-hmm.
uplifting. And that is
Sure.
important for
Yeah.
sure. But look, we're not doing anyone any favors by pretending that there's this heartbreaking element to our lives.
Yeah, to me it's like both parts matter, right? Like it's great when you're able to move forward and you're finding your path, but the path that you were on, the part that got you to where you are now is also worth honoring and recognizing.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Hmm. And so, Karen, what more about the turmoil that you experienced with your story, with this untold story, are you comfortable sharing in terms of what you endured during this time, being a teenager and attempting suicide?
Yes. Well, talking with you ahead of time before the podcast and reflecting on it got me thinking about, well, let me portray some of that turmoil. And of course, that suicide attempt was a while back. And really, I was a child, I was 14. And I'm so at a different consciousness right now that it's difficult to go back. But I sat in reflection and thought about it, and also read through some of the diaries that I kept. I have always kept diaries since I was a child. And when I go back and look at that time, even my handwriting is different. And it's really a journal of self-loathing. It's a journal
Right.
of self-hatred when I go back and look at it. And I now am, of course, at a point in the work, if you want to call it that, where I have so much compassion for 14-year-old Karen. But I do also recall that turmoil. It's sometimes difficult for me to recall
Mm-hmm.
because once we move into a different frame of consciousness, it's incredible to believe this, but we actually forget.
Mm-hmm.
It's like after someone gives birth, they forget the pain,
Right.
but they know they were in a lot of pain.
Right.
And so I know I was in pain because I do recall putting together a pros and cons list of the pros of not killing myself and the cons of not killing myself, and a pros and cons list, and weighing out the options,
Mm-hmm.
and who would benefit by my death. And I honestly thought the world would be a better place if I was not on it. So it was a very logical decision for me
Uh-huh.
to overdose. So the turmoil was just incredible self-hatred.
Mm.
That was the true turmoil.
Right. And so this kind of an experience certainly changes a person. Do you feel that it also changed you?
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes I like to not sometimes, a lot of the time, I like to dabble in the psycho-spiritual, the esoteric, the metaphysical. And there's this concept in metaphysical thinking of a walk-in. I don't know if it's true,
Mm-hmm.
but I find it interesting to read about this concept of a walk-in. And what it refers to is that when people are sometimes at a point where they truly cannot go on, if there's a clarion call sent out to the universe, some higher aspect of that person's soul steps into the body
Mm-hmm.
and quote unquote walks in and takes over. Right.
Okay.
So when you asked, did it change me? I had this thought that, wow, maybe some other aspect, some higher aspect of myself or some other spirit walked in at that
Mm-hmm.
point,
Mm-hmm.
because looking back, it feels like I am a different person. Now, what actually happened is most likely, well, I know that I did commit to a path of healing without even consciously knowing it. So now it feels like that's not even the same person anymore.
Right.
In many ways, I'm not the same person anymore, but in many other ways, I still am the same person. It's just there's no more self hate.
Right. And so this walk-in was really like a spirit that came into your body and that it really came to help. And it's kind of like you were told, okay, little Karen, I'm here now.
That's honestly what it feels like.
I can take over. I can take it from here, or I've got you. I've got your back. We're in this together. So it was that sort of a feeling for you when you talk about the walk-in?
That is 100% exactly what I still feel to this day, like
Mm-hmm.
something or someone walked in and saved
Mm-hmm.
me.
And then somehow you did the work to survive.
Yes. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because I can't tell you what the step by step plan was,
Right.
but something shifted.
Right.
For sure, something shifted. So, yeah.
And so when something shifted and you did the work to survive, what sort of commitment did you make to yourself?
Well, I've made many, I've had other experiences of depression and dark nights of the soul. So there's been commitments I've made throughout. But going back to that time, I can't remember consciously making a commitment, but I do remember being referred quite quickly, to psychiatry and to high school counseling staff.
Right.
And I remember talking with this lovely high school counselor who had me in somehow, I don't know how she convinced me to do this, but to just write a list out of everything that people liked about me. I couldn't quite get to talking about what I liked about myself, but what other people liked about me. So, and I was a good student. I did what I was told. So when a counselor told me to do
Right.
something, I did it. I did my
Right.
homework, right? That ideal client we all want.
Right. You
So
just did
yeah,
your
I
homework and
actually did my homework. So
mhm.
I guess I made a commitment to little by little make that slight tilt in the trajectory, just a
Mhm.
slight turn to face that sunshine,
Right.
even when I didn't feel like there was any hope.
Right. So you really did commit to life.
It's just that slight, it's just that slight little tilt. I guess it's a commitment to life. Yeah.
Well, a slight tilt is the start, right? It's the start
Yeah.
of something new.
Right.
And you were willing to do it.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Me or the walk in, one of us was willing.
Well, I definitely think you must have been there. You must have been part of it. Even if there was, as you said, a spirit guiding you, I'm sure you were still, well, I mean, I can't be certain, but it sounds like the way you described the walk in, it's like they held you, like you were held. And so you didn't let go. That's where I get this
Hmm.
idea that you were there the whole time.
Yeah.
And once that sense of hope or that sense of deep knowing that, okay, it's something is possible, something different is possible, you stayed with it.
Yes. Yeah. And I guess that's the commitment.
Hmm. And so, Karen, what part of the journey, of your journey, are you in? Would you say that you are looking back, in the middle, or just getting started?
Well, I would say I'm definitely looking back. Uh,
Hmm.
I even feel myself having to go into a different mindset because it was so many years ago, but it was also so many lifetimes ago and so many ways of thinking ago and so many ways of being in the world ago. So I'm definitely looking back. And at the same time, I'm just getting started because I really am looking back in a way where I can finally, in my mid 50s, see that every 8 to 10 years there's been a new person being birthed who
Hmm.
almost doesn't recognize the person I was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, or.
Right.
So,
Hmm.
and I feel like something is definitely being birthed right now. And
Hmm.
on that way, I'm just getting started. And I wouldn't be able to just be getting started had I not had that early experience with really almost losing myself.
So it's like you have book one, which is looking back and that process of being in love with life now, no matter the circumstance of getting from that place of the self hate to self love, right? Like, so you were able to go through that process and do it so well with
Right.
everything along the way, with all the obstacles. And so that's book one. And now that book one is completed, the getting started is your book two.
Yes. And the
Mm-hmm.
getting started is okay, now that I truly love this miracle that I am and that you are and that we are and that
Mm-hmm.
life, like I
Mm-hmm.
have so much love for life.
Mm-hmm.
Now what?
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at right now. It's not always pretty in sunshine and rainbows, even though I'm talking like it is, because the sun truly is shining brightly through my window right
Mm-hmm.
now.
Mm-hmm.
But the difference is I honestly, Salima, I honestly embrace the messiness and the awkwardness, and
Yeah.
I don't always know where I'm going from day to day bit.
Messy and awkward is fine.
And that took a while. That's book two for sure.
Yeah. And so, what do you want to remember about this process of your healing journey?
What do I want to remember about the
Mm-hmm.
process? Well, what I always want to be able to remind myself is that a miracle is a shift in perception. That's not my idea. That comes from A Course in Miracles. But it's the thing I keep coming back to over and over again, is that
Mm-hmm.
miracles do happen.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that, and it's what I
Mm-hmm.
remind myself of. And that the miracle starts with a shift in perception. And one of the prayers from A Course in Miracles is, you don't have to be, let's say, religious or believe in any higher power to follow A Course in Miracles teachings, but the prayer is, I am willing to see this different. I'm willing to see this differently.
Right.
So that's what I remind myself. That's what I hope I always can remind myself of that.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, it's an important piece to remember. I think it's also important to remember the challenges, and particularly the challenges that you shared with us today. So I think it's also important for us to remember the challenges along the way, especially the challenges that you spoke of with such eloquence. And I remember when we chatted a little earlier, you mentioned that there was a quote that sort of exemplifies this. Do you remember what that quote is?
Well, I don't know if it's a quote per se, but it's a popular saying, which is, it's
Okay.
always darkest before the dawn.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we had talked about that at
Mm-hmm.
length, because for me, I see us, in the therapy field
Mm-hmm.
as midwives helping people through that difficult birth of a new part of the personality, a new growth, a new dawn of the
Mm-hmm.
person's life. And we're helping people birth that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and of course, the birth is, there's pain involved. And so I always remind myself of that, that it's always darkest before the dawn. I don't
Mm-hmm.
always say it out loud, but it really is, yeah.
Right. And so, what would you say that you're grateful for with encountering this journey of yours?
Well, I'm truly grateful for the angels that have shown up for me.
Mm-hmm.
And just every day there are angels showing up, right? All through life. And
Mm-hmm.
and I'm definitely grateful for those angels, those people that seem to come swooping in.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Was there a particular angel that comes to mind when you were going through the thick of your dark night of the soul?
Well, there were a few, and it's, of course, again, easier for me to see this now, but one angel that truly helped me was a next door neighbor that I was really close to for many years growing up, and her name was Peggy. She's passed on. And Peggy was truly an angel. She was like a grandmother figure.
Mm-hmm.
I would, have snacks with her after school, and she really was like a grandmother figure, though she was a next door neighbor. And she was my angel during that time of my depression and my suicide attempt, because she was the one who showed up and called emergency personnel. So she actually physically saved my life. and
Wow.
and then she showed up for me in so many other ways. When I look back, I think there was an angel network of strong women. Peggy was one of
Mm-hmm.
them, and my mother really kicked into action, and a high school counselor. I had a lot of strong women who kicked into action pretty quickly, which I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah. Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you, Peggy.
I mean,
Yes,
yeah,
bless her
well, because
soul.
of Peggy, we get to have you here today speaking about this very story.
Yeah.
And so it's really, really nice to know that there was someone there that day, and it's someone that you remember today, and someone that we can acknowledge.
Yeah.
Certainly sounds like an angel.
Yes.
And so, Karen, what impact would you say that you've experienced on your mental health, as a result of going through all that you did, speaking about the resilience and all of the stuff that came after?
You mean what was the impact on my mental health back then or overall?
Overall, like your impact on, you had this experience, right? And it certainly has impacted your mental health since then, right? As a result of going through all the things that you did. And from a resilience standpoint, can you share about how you have been impacted?
From a resilience standpoint, definitely your title captures it because going from self loathing, self hatred to self love is really it.
Oh, you mean the episode title?
Yes, the episode title.
The inner tale of shifting from self-hate to self-love.
Yes, that's a better articulation. that sounds good. I got to write
Hmm.
a book, and that's going to be the name of it.
Go for it. And so, would you say that the dark nights made you mentally stronger?
Oh my goodness, yes, they make us all stronger.
Yeah.
I took a tour a few years back in Northern California through one of those national parks with the really huge trees. And I remember the forest ranger who was taking me on a tour of the tree park, pointing out the tallest trees in the park, the ones that are so majestic, that you see the pictures of everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
They're just phenomenal to behold. And the ones that were the strongest and the tallest were the ones that had survived the forest fires. And the park ranger was saying that the forest fires are necessary to
Mm-hmm.
trigger the regrowth process. And
Mm-hmm.
so that metaphor of going through the fire and becoming stronger, it has always stuck with me.
So you went through the fire, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's mental health. Is that inner peace and that inner resilience that comes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you really cultivated that inner peace and resilience over time. And now, having gone through that and being in the mental health field and being in the helping professional, do you ever have doubts when people come to you about topics like this, or when they come to you with presenting issues about suicide or self harm or being in a really, really dark place?
I have a deep knowing, and it's stronger than any doubt
Mm-hmm.
because I have a deep knowing of what the human spirit is capable of.
Mm-hmm.
And because I have that, I don't know how to explain it, but just this like energetic knowing, I think people pick up on that. I rarely share any of my story
Mm-hmm.
when I'm in therapy with people,
Mm-hmm.
but I am able to truly hold space for the darkest of the dark, and I don't flinch because I have this deep knowing that this is where we are right now, and I can hold the hope when the person in front of me doesn't.
Right.
And I think that only comes with experience, personal
Right.
experience.
And so you hold the space for them, you hold the container for them.
Yeah, I think, and you don't have to be a therapist to be able to do that. I
Mm-hmm.
think honestly that when we go through these sorts of forest fires in our lives, and then we call it in psychology, we're able to integrate.
Yes.
We're able to integrate painful experiences and they don't define us anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then something magical happens that we can hold space. Whether you're a therapist or not, you're able to hold human suffering in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Where a person who's struggling and suffering feels uplifted just being in your energetic presence. There's a knowing between the two souls.
Yeah, I do feel like I practice in a similar way, and I feel that the integration piece is really important because, sometimes I haven't had the experience of the other, but I can relate to the experience in some way. And I feel like that keeps me really humble while they unfold. And I can help hold that suffering in that moment.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is an energetic thing, isn't it? It's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily anything you say or do. Of course, we have clinical tools, but it's more like this flow of understanding that comes from this deep well that you wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
have had you not lived through being at the bottom of the well and thinking there was no way out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, having gone through all of what you've gone through and coming through where you're at, book one is finished, book two is starting, Karen's book one and Karen's book two. And now, you know, you've had all these learnings and all these lessons on your path and all these things that you've been impacted by both negatively and positively. What is your key message to the listeners of our show? What are some key messages that you think is important for them to know?
Well, let me just think about this. A key message for someone, let's say someone who's going through a hopelessness feeling time and they're in the trenches. If you can, have incredible self compassion for the one that's in the trenches, have incredible love for the one that can't see a way out. And if you can't do that, then don't have tea with the monster of your mind. And so,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that will at least get you started on opening up the space for a little bit of self compassion to help you along. Once self compassion kicks in, it will override, it will point the way to where you can't see right now. You'll be able to see the forest for the trees. But when you can't,
Mm-hmm.
then the best thing you can do is take the space to get away from your thoughts. Because if there's no self compassion, you don't want to listen too closely to your thoughts
Mm-hmm.
because they truly are delusional. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't mean that in a diagnostic way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when we are out of touch with love, then we're not thinking clearly. We're delusional.
Mm-hmm.
We really, truly are. And so for us to give any credence at all to any thoughts we're having is just an exercise in digging deeper into an illusion. I call it having tea with the monster.
I love it. I mean, it says so much. Those few words, but it says so much. Really talks about the depth of despair, right? And how when you're in the depth of despair, like this is where you could end up unknowingly.
Right. Unknowingly, right?
Mm-hmm.
You think you're maybe helping yourself, but
Yeah,
no. You're sometimes at a point where you are not the one to be helping yourself.
right. This is where you reach out.
Absolutely.
And do you have a specific message to anyone with regards to like cultivating a spiritual practice or anything of that sort?
Well, me personally, I think it's essential. I really do. And I am now, and this is part of my book too, Salima. My book two of my life is being
Mm-hmm.
unabashedly forthright about that the spiritual is a component of mental health. And if we ignore that, we do so at our own peril. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't believe that you certainly do not have to be religious. You certainly are welcome to be an atheist. There's no reason at all for you to have to believe in anything higher or have, you don't have to be a fan of anything new age or mystical. When I say spiritual, I mean commitment to consciousness raising, a
Mm-hmm.
commitment to honoring that which you cannot name, but that is related to the spirit of all things.
Mm-hmm.
And the human being, we need this for inner peace. We need this for inner peace. So your spiritual practice, that's up to each person and it changes through the years. It could start with, 5-minute breathing meditation and lighting a candle. It could start with affirmations.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, to leave the spirit out of any mental health discussions is such a tragedy, and it's resulted in so much disconnection and fragmentation
Mm-hmm.
from the human journey. And I think it's where we need to really improve in the mental health field.
Yeah, and I like the idea of, spirituality, I think sometimes can be misinterpreted. And there's so many ways to bring in spirituality and creatively, and even starting a meditation practice doesn't necessarily have to mean sitting still in silence. I think it's great when people are able to achieve that space of being able to sit in silence, which is an important part of journeying. But just knowing that there's so many ways to start that process.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And really, the process is, can you make your life a meditation? It's not necessarily about sitting in silence. You're correct about that. But it is about getting outside of the space of
Mm-hmm.
thoughts and
Mm-hmm.
moving into something else, transcending your thought based way of living in the world. People can't even fathom that, but it's possible.
Yeah. I hear you, like, as you talk about all of this, I really hear you talking about commitment to life above all else, right? So, as long as you're committing to life, then you've tilted your path a little bit into the direction that's more helpful. And I also hear you talk very big about self love above all else and self compassion above all else. And then you continue working. If you're doing it through the means of self love and self compassion and you're committing to life, there will always be light. It's kind of
Yes.
the essence of what I'm hearing you say as you've talked with us today.
Yeah, that is pretty much the essence of my teachings. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. And so I'm curious about what is your game changer inspiration that is close to you that reflects your untold story? So would it be a quote or a book or something that speaks to you?
Yes, well, there is a book that comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a nerd and I love books, lots of books. But I, at the risk of sounding overly dramatic, I always talk about this book that probably saved my life, or at least stopped me from a second suicide attempt, which
Mm-hmm.
was a book my mother gave me when I was a teenager, shortly after I'd been hospitalized and was a formal, had the experience of being a patient in the mental health system. And that book was Living, Loving, Learning.
Okay.
It's an old book. I think it was published in late 70s, early 80s, by Leo Buscaglia, who wrote about love. And
Mm-hmm.
even to this day, I go back and I read that book because it was truly a game changer for me. I was
Mm-hmm.
underlining every sentence and pausing and saying to myself, wow, I never thought this way before. It was just a
Mm-hmm.
completely revolutionary way of thinking.
Right.
And in that book are many quotes and many beautiful, just little snippets to help you shift your trajectory. And so one of the little snippets was a quote from Thornton Wilder, which is to this day one of my favorites, which is, "There is a land of the living and a land of the dead, and the bridge in between is love, the only survival and the only meaning." And that's it.
Wow.
Isn't that a beautiful quote?
It's so beautiful. I was just listening and I was just taking it in. So there was a moment of silence there because I was just like, wow. It's a very, very enriching and moving quote.
I think it
Hmm.
says so much.
Oh, yeah. So many layers. Absolutely. And so this is the time where I ask you if there is a cause or an organization that has been impactful to you on your journey that perhaps you would like to give a shout out to.
I am going to give a shout out to the good people at Heart Math. It sounds like a commercial now, and they are not paying me to say this. The only reason I'm saying Heart Math is because there is an organization, from what I can tell, of I don't, I'm not involved in them with them formally in any way, but there is an organization really dedicated to bringing the spiritual into a mind, body, spirit approach to healing. And I think they're doing a great job in healing the planet from all the human suffering. There's so much human suffering. And I think the techniques, the teachings, the service offered by that organization have been quite beautiful.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I wish they would have been around when I was younger and was in my distress.
Sure. And it's great that you're able to mention them now. So even though certainly this is an organization that could have helped you when you were in your time of need, perhaps this is something that people can look into if they're in need right now.
Yeah, I'd really encourage people to give that a lookie.
And so, Karen, how can people connect with you if they would like to? So perhaps they feel they needed to connect with you personally in some way. Is that possible for you?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Send me an email, Karen at daybreaktherapy.ca.
Okay. Karen at daybreaktherapy.ca.
And of course, if you visit the website, daybreaktherapy.ca, we have a directory of beautiful practitioners who really do take a holistic mind, body, spirit approach to clinical counseling and psychotherapy. So
amazing.
Worth taking a look at, I think.
Oh, for sure. Thank you for that. And Karen, this was such a pivotal conversation today. I want to thank you for sharing so authentically and from a place of vulnerability and with full permission for allowing the rawness to remain present in how you shared and had your story unfold in today's show. And I thank you for just being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma.
Thank you, Salima. And thank you for the world-changing work that you're doing. It means a lot to me and to us.
Thank you. Well, I'm hopeful that this will help others come forward to tell a story of their own. Just all of us having an opportunity to inspire others.
That's right.
Inspiration.
That's how we light up the planet.
Exactly.
That's how we do it.
Yeah. Inspiration for and by inspiration, right? So yeah, I'm really hopeful that this will help others come forward and tell their own story, knowing that it's a safe place to do. And certainly only tell your story when you're ready, but sometimes we need gentle nudges, and that's okay too. So I'll cross my fingers that we are able to help other people in the community in this way.
Yes, thank you.
To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.